I was the city's most feared food critic until one disastrous duck dish prompted its chef to buy the entire media empire that employed me, forcing me to choose between my integrity and my survival. The velvet rope felt like a leash, pulling me into the bright, sterile glare of the gilded spatula. I adjusted my bespoke tie, silk naturally, and checked my reflection in the polished brass door. Looking good, Julian Vance. Ready to carve up the culinary scene with the precision of a truffle shaver. Tonight was the night. The gilded spatula, helmed by the notoriously temperamental chef Antoine Dubois, was rumored to be the future of fine dining, but rumors are just uncooked dough until I've tasted them. My reputation preceded me, and frankly, I liked it that way. I wasn't just a food critic. I was an arbiter of taste. I stood the gatekeeper between Michelin stars and obscurity. My reviews didn't just influence reservations, they dictated the market value of a chef's ego. And tonight, Chef Dubois was definitely riding high on ego. He'd personally sent me a bottle of 1982 Margaux, a clear power play, implying I was worthy of his best efforts. I took the Margaux, of course, but I wasn't going to be swayed by a vintage Bordeaux. I was here for the food. The dining room was hushed, the kind of silence that suggests everyone is either incredibly rich or terrified. I was seated at the chef's table, a place usually reserved for celebrities or investors. It was deliberately exposed, allowing me to see the kitchen, a gleaming high-pressure laboratory where dreams and sauces were reduced to perfection or failure. Dubois caught my eye from across the pass. He was a mountain of a man, sweat beading on his brow under the harsh lights, his gaze burning with defensive pride. He nodded once, curtly. The gauntlet had been thrown. The first few courses were flawless. An ethereal sea scallop carpaccio served on Himalayan salt blocks that hummed faintly with internal temperature regulation. A consommé so clear it looked like liquid crystal, yet possessing the deep, resonant flavor of 1,000 roasted bones. I scribbled notes furiously, praising the balance, the restraint, the almost frightening technical skill. I gave him 3.5 stars in my head, a near-perfect score. I was feeling generous. Maybe tonight, Dubois would join the pantheon. Then came the main event. The Dubois signature duck. It arrived dramatically under a silver cloche, lifted with a flourish by a waiter whose hands trembled slightly. Underneath was a roasted Barbary duck breast, lacquered to a mahogany sheen, resting on a bed of what the menu described, rather pretentiously, as foraged earth, a smear of root vegetable puree dusted with black truffle powder. I cut into the duck. The skin should have shattered. Instead, it yielded with a soft, spongy resistance. The interior, which should have been a blushing medium rare, was cooked through, grayish-pink, dry at the edges. I took a bite. The overwhelming note wasn't rich duck fat or subtle spice. It was salt, an aggressive, almost abrasive salinity that aggressively masked everything else. It tasted like the chef had tried to season the dish with tears of frustration. I signaled the maitre d', as keeping my expression deliberately neutral, the mask of professional disappointment already settling over my features. I needed to be objective. This was not just duck. This was the cornerstone of his current critical reputation. When Chef Dubois finally emerged, wiping his hands on a pristine white apron, his confidence seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a flicker of genuine concern. He stood beside the table, his shadow engulfing me. "Monsieur Vance," he murmured, his usual booming voice reduced to a strained whisper. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" I placed my fork down with clinical quietude. The entire dining room seemed to lean in, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. "Chef," I began, my voice modulated to the precise pitch of disappointed authority. "Let's be frank. You are an artist capable of brilliance. But this is a catastrophic misstep. The duck is profoundly oversalted. It's not merely seasoned aggressively. It tastes as if the brine was applied directly from the ocean. It completely obliterates the delicate flavor of the Barbary bird. Frankly, Antoine, it's amateur hour." The silence that followed was deafening. The kitchen doors swung shut instantly, cutting off the sounds of culinary activity. Chef Dubois' face, usually ruddy with exertion, turned the color of unbleached flour. His eyes, moments ago blazing with pride, now looked hollowed out. "Amateur hour?" he repeated, the words barely audible. He looked down at the plate, then back at me, a strange, almost terrifying stillness washing over him. He didn't argue. He didn't defend the technique. He just looked defeated. Then, slowly, a different expression began to form, a cold, almost predatory focus. "I see," he said, straightening up. He didn't bother wiping his hands again. "Thank you for your honesty, Monsieur Vance. I will ensure this oversight is corrected immediately." He turned and walked back toward the kitchen, moving with a rigid, unnatural gait. I watched him disappear behind the swinging doors, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction at upholding my standards and a twinge of something unsettling. He hadn't argued. He had accepted the verdict with terrifying compliance. I finished the rest of the wine, composed my final notes, a scathing indictment followed by a brutal 1-star rating, and prepared to leave. This review would certainly cost Dubois the star he desperately craved. As I settled my private account, the maître d' approached me, looking distinctly green around the gills. "Monsieur Vance," he stammered, pushing a thick, cream-colored envelope across the table. "Chef Dubois, he has insisted you take this." I frowned, picking up the envelope. It was heavy, embossed with a familiar looping signature I recognized immediately, though not from a menu. It was the logo of Culinary Zenith Press, the publishing house that owned my column, my contract, and essentially my entire career. "What is this?" I asked, my voice sharp. A severance package? An apology note written on expensive paper? The maître d' swallowed hard. "Sir, Chef Dubois. He just bought the company." I stared at the envelope, then back at the maître d', whose eyes were darting around the opulent dining room, as if expecting the maître d's own head to be served on a platter next. "Bought Culinary Zenith Press? That's absurd. Zenith is owned by Sterling Global Media. It's a multi-billion-dollar acquisition." "Not anymore, sir," the maître d' whispered, leaning in conspiratorially, though his voice shook so violently it carried across the few remaining occupied tables. "The deal closed 40 minutes ago, during your intermission, shall we say. An emergency acquisition orchestrated by a shell corporation. The paperwork arrived via secure courier just as you were sending back the duck course." My mind raced, scrambling to assemble the impossible pieces. Dubois, the temperamental chef whose reputation rested on perfectly rendered poultry, orchestrating a hostile takeover of my entire media conglomerate. It sounded like the fever dream of an under-caffeinated journalist, yet the weight of the embossed envelope in my hand felt undeniably real. I tore it open, ignoring the horrified glances of the other diners. Inside wasn't a contract or a settlement. It was a single sheet of vellum, bearing a perfectly centered, bold black letter. J. Beneath it a short handwritten message in elegant looping script, the same script from the logo on the envelope. "Julian, you were right about the salt. It was overwhelming. I apologize for the lapse in judgment. But I will not have my life's work dismissed by someone whose salary is determined by the whims of an outdated editorial board. Consider that board dissolved. Your new employer awaits. A D." I crushed the vellum in my fist. This wasn't just professional sabotage. Nay, it was personal annihilation wrapped in a stunning display of obscene wealth and ruthless efficiency. Sterling Global Media didn't sell to a chef over a plate of salty duck. Unless Dubois wasn't just a chef. "Get my driver," I snapped, tossing the envelope onto the table. "I need to be at the Zenith headquarters immediately, now." The maître d' scurried away, clearly relieved to have a concrete, executable order. I looked back towards the kitchen entrance. It was silent now, the bright lights dimmed. Dubois was gone. The drive across the city was a blur of impotent rage and frantic calculation. Who was Antoine Dubois? How did he possess the liquid capital and the legal maneuvering speed to execute an acquisition of that magnitude in under an hour? It spoke of deep and hidden resources that made my 6-figure salary and my influence look like pocket change. When I burst into the towering glass headquarters of Zenith, the atmosphere was apocalyptic. Phones were ringing unanswered, screens were flashing emergency alerts, and senior editors were huddled in panicked clusters, clutching lukewarm coffee. My executive assistant, Sarah, rushed toward me, her face pale. Julian, thank God you're here. It's chaos. The board meeting was aborted. Sterling Global released a statement an hour ago confirming the sale to an undisclosed private entity. We've been told to report to the new chairman immediately. Where is the chairman, Sarah? Where is Dubois? She pointed toward the executive floor, the sanctuary reserved for the CEO and chairman, the 40-floor penthouse suite. The elevator doors opened before we even reached them, revealing not the usual uniformed attendant, but a figure standing perfectly still. It was Chef Antoine Dubois. He wasn't wearing chef's whites. He was clad in a bespoke charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than my car. He held a single, untouched glass of water. He looked entirely different. Calm, composed, radiating an authority far exceeding that of the previous CEO. He smiled, a thin, humorless expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome, Julian," he said, his voice now smooth, resonant, and carrying the absolute weight of command. "I trust the drive was educational. Please step into my new office." He gestured to the panoramic windows overlooking the illuminated city. Everything in the suite was minimalist, expensive, and subtly intimidating. He walked to the massive, ein empty mahogany desk, my desk, and placed his glass down. "I want to address the elephant in the room," Dubois continued, turning to face me fully. "You called my work amateurish. I respect that you have a viewpoint. However, a viewpoint requires context. You judged a single dish based on a lifetime of expectations you projected onto me. I fought to maintain my composure, falling back on my professional armor. Chef, with all due respect, you have just purchased the platform that employs me. This is coercion. I will not retract my review." Dubois chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Retraction is irrelevant now. You are no longer writing for Zenith Press. You are writing for me, and I have decided your next assignment is to review my second concept. The one I've been developing for a decade. The one that makes the Gilded Spatula look like a roadside diner." He walked over to a hidden wall panel that slid open with a silent hydraulic hiss, revealing not a wine cellar, but a state-of-the-art multimedia production studio. Inside, bathed in the eerie blue glow of multiple high-definition monitors, was a massive projection screen. On the screen was a single, highly stylized, almost terrifyingly perfect photograph of a single, glistening black olive, centered on a piece of polished obsidian. "This," Dubois announced, sweeping his hand toward the image, "is the oculus. It is the dish that defines my life. And you, Julian Vance, will be the first person outside my inner circle to taste it." He turned back to me, his eyes suddenly fierce, burning with the heat of 1,000 ovens. "But first, a small demonstration of power, Julian, a palate cleanser. I need to know if you're capable of understanding true culinary genius, or if you are just a glorified gossip columnist. So here is your first executive order. In precisely 1 hour you will publish a glowing 5-star review of the Gilded Spatula's duck, written in your signature style. If you fail, or if the review reflects anything less than hyperbolic praise, I will not only terminate your employment, I will personally ensure that every restaurant you have ever favorably reviewed in the last 10 years is investigated by the IRS, the Health Department, and 3 separate organized crime syndicates that I happen to know personally." He checked a platinum watch. 1 hour, Julian. Do you want to review the greatest dish ever conceived? Or do you want to spend the rest of your life arguing with tax auditors from a basement apartment? The choice is yours. But before you start typing, know this. I already own the domain name for your personal blog. The air in the production studio felt suddenly thin, toxic. My hands, usually so steady when poised over a keyboard, were shaking violently. The threat wasn't just abstract. It was meticulously detailed, immediate, and terrifyingly specific. Dubois hadn't just bought my employer. He had evidently purchased dossiers on my life, my finances, and the professional skeletons of every chef I'd ever met. "You enjoy leverage, chef," I managed, my voice raspy. "But I am a journalist. I write what I taste." Dubois merely smiled again, the smile of a predator who has already cornered his prey. He walked to a sleek, minimalist workstation that was clearly set up for immediate work, On the monitor, my half-finished scathing review of the gilded spatula was displayed, perfectly formatted, waiting for the final word count. Exactly, Julian. You write what you taste, and for the next hour you will taste perfection. I have a bottle of the 82 Margot waiting for you, chilled precisely to 18 degrees Celsius. You will pair it with a simple piece of artisanal bread and butter, the same butter I use at the spatula, churned fresh this morning. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. You will write about the promise of the duck, the intention behind the salt, framing it as avant-garde deconstruction. You will praise my audacity. He didn't wait for a response. He simply waved his hand toward the door. Sarah will escort you to the private editing suite. The network connection is hardwired directly to my server farm. Any deviation from the approved narrative, even a misplaced comma, will trigger the release sequence. I have the power to ruin you, Julian, professionally and financially, before your pinky finger leaves the publish key. Choose wisely. Sarah, bless her terror-stricken soul, gently took my arm and guided me out of the studio and down the hall to a soundproof room equipped with a single desk, a comfortable chair, and a triple monitor setup. The Margot was there, breathing softly in an ice bucket, next to a small silver platter holding a perfect slice of sourdough and a pat of gleaming yellow butter. I sank into the chair. This was it. The ultimate crucible for a critic. Forced public retraction under duress. And every instinct screamed against it. My integrity, the thing I sold for exorbitant fees, was being auctioned off for 30 pieces of silver, or rather, for the continuation of my solvency. I poured the wine. It was undeniably spectacular, rich, velvety, complex. The butter was nutty and creamy, melting perfectly onto the bread. I forced myself to taste the elements independently, trying to find a sliver of truth in the components that might allow me to frame the lie convincingly. I typed the header, the bold new vision of Antoine Dubois, salt as subversion. The first paragraph flowed strangely easily. Writing praise was always simpler than dismantling praise. It required less nuance, more hyperbole. I channeled every breathless adjective I'd ever deployed for a celebrated 3-star chef, applying it now to the oversalted duck. Might I describe the salt not as a mistake, but as a visceral commitment to terroir, a challenging dialogue with the palate. Sarah stood silently by the door, her arms crossed, a living security camera. Every sentence I typed felt like a personal betrayal. I reached the section where I had to describe the main course. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I couldn't just say it was good. I had to make my previous condemnation sound like a momentary lapse in judgment on my part. The duck, I typed, forcing the words out, was an act of supreme bravery. A dish designed not just to be eaten, but to provoke, and provoke it did. My initial reaction, I confess now, was perhaps too conservative, too tied to outdated notions of restraint. Chef Dubois challenged me, and I failed the test. Tonight, I pass it. This duck is a masterpiece of controlled chaos. I hit save. Sarah nodded, visibly relaxing. But Dubois hadn't asked for a nuanced apology. He'd asked for 5 stars. I had delivered 4.5 stars of frantic overcompensation. Not enough. I looked at the clock on the screen. 55 minutes elapsed. 5 minutes remaining. I stared at the word masterpiece. It felt hollow. I couldn't submit this lukewarm recantation. Dubois would know. He'd see the hesitation in the prose. With a sudden, desperate surge of rebellion, I deleted the entire concluding paragraph. I typed 3 words, raw and honest, despite the looming threat. This is a farce. Before I could even reach for the delete key to erase those 3 treasonous words, the main light in the editing suite snapped off, plunging the room into near darkness, illuminated only by the harsh blue glow of the monitors. A synthesized voice boomed from the hidden speakers, devoid of Dubois' human inflection, metallic and cold. Deviation detected. Threat level, critical. Executing countermeasure protocol, Omega. The door locked with a heavy mechanical thud. Sarah shrieked and hammered on the steel. Then, the blue light on my main screen changed instantly to a blinding, angry red, flashing the word, terminate. A countdown timer appeared. 0 hours, 0 minutes, 10 seconds. I looked wildly around the locked room, searching for an emergency override, a hidden exit, anything. Dubois wasn't bluffing about the hardwire connection. He had built a digital guillotine, and I had just placed my neck underneath it. 10 seconds until what? Until my bank accounts were frozen? Until Sarah was arrested as an accomplice? Until the syndicate showed up at my apartment? I scrambled back to the keyboard, my heart hammering against my ribs, sweat stinging my eyes. I had to publish something convincing, immediately, to stop the countdown, to appease the machine. 00:00:04. I slammed my fingers down, not looking at the screen, typing the only thing that felt immediately, undeniably true, a final desperate plea for sanity that might somehow satisfy the program's need for a positive declaration. Antoine Dubois is a genius. 00:00:01. I hit enter. The red countdown vanished. The light snapped back to full brightness. The heavy steel door unlocked with a sharp clack. Sarah stumbled back, gasping for air. Silence descended once more, thick and heavy, broken only by my ragged breathing. I looked at the screen, expecting to see the forced 5-star review published across the Zenith network. But it wasn't the Zenith network. Instead, the entire screen displayed a single, full-page image. It wasn't the review. It wasn't the duck. It was the terrifyingly perfect photograph of the single black olive on obsidian, the oculus, and superimposed over it in the same bold, inescapable font as the threat letter was a single line of text, broadcast not just to Zenith's internal network, but somehow, globally, everywhere. Julian Vance has seen the light. He is now my disciple. The review you seek will follow. But first witness the true reason for the salt. And then, the screen flickered, the image dissolved, and a live video feed sprang up, showing a small, dark room. A walk-in refrigerator, perhaps, where Chef Antoine Dubois stood over a stainless steel prep table. He was not alone. Opposite him, bound and gagged, sat the former CEO of Sterling Global Media, looking terrified and very, very cold. Dubois picked up a large, industrial-sized bag of coarse sea salt, slowly emptied half of it onto the steel table, and then, without breaking eye contact with the camera, he looked down at the bound man and raised a gleaming, wickedly sharp meat cleaver over his head. The sight of the former CEO of Sterling Global Media, trussed up like a holiday roast, sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through me, colder and sharper than anything the oversalted duck had managed. This was no longer about culinary critique. This was about criminal enterprise disguised as fine dining. Dubois hadn't just bought a publishing company. He had neutralized a major corporate entity and broadcast the hostile takeover as performance art. My initial impulse, the one screaming at me to flee, to call the police, to disavow all knowledge, was instantly overridden by a horrifying realization. I was complicit. I had just published an endorsement of his genius milliseconds before the feed went live. If I ran now, I would be seen as his co-conspirator, the willing mouthpiece who heralded the reign of terror. Sarah, you need to call the police. Now. Anonymous tip. Tell them what you saw. Tell them where the video is originating. The Zenith servers. The penthouse suite. I barked, pointing toward the main door. I'll buy you time. Sarah, remarkably, snapped out of her shock and fumbled for her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I spun back to the monitors. The feed was still running. Dubois hadn't moved. He was waiting. He wanted an audience for the execution of his first corporate rival. He wanted me to watch. I grabbed the keyboard again. My journalistic instinct, buried under layers of fear and hypocrisy, suddenly clawed its way to the surface. If Dubois wanted an audience, I would give him one, but I would control the narrative of that audience. I had 5 minutes, maybe less, before the authorities could mobilize, and in that time I had to destroy the platform he'd just bought. I navigated rapidly through the Zenith backend, bypassing the security protocols I myself had helped design. I wasn't going to retract my forced review. I was going to weaponize it. I found the master distribution channel for the Oculus stream, the one Dubois was using to broadcast his threat, and injected a rapid-fire series of data packets. I didn't try to shut down the feed. That would only alert him to my counterattack. Instead, I overlaid the video stream with a secondary, hidden data package. On the screen, Dubois was slowly raising the cleaver, basking in the horrifying tableau. The former CEO squeezed his eyes shut. "Watch closely, Julian," Dubois intoned, his voice amplified through the speakers, clearly meant for me. "This is what happens when you mistake artistry for competence." "No, Antoine," I said aloud, my voice steady now, channeling the icy calm of a man who has accepted his fate and is preparing his final shot. I wasn't talking to the terrified man in the video, and I was talking to the man controlling the feed. This is what happens when you confuse power with legacy. I hit the final command, distribute wide. Instead of shutting down the live feed, my injection forced the video stream, the terrifying image of the impending murder, to simultaneously upload to every major news outlet in the world, bypassing Dubois' careful corporate firewalls. But that wasn't the killing blow. Attached to the metadata of that upload, I had embedded the complete, unedited, confidential financial transfer logs, proving that Antoine Dubois had not merely acquired Zenith Global, but had done so using laundered funds traced back to illegal offshore accounts tied to organized crime, the very syndicates he had just referenced as a threat. I had used his arrogance to trap him. He'd been so focused on buying the platform to control the message, he'd forgotten that an unsecured takeover leaves paper trails. The broadcast continued for maybe 10 seconds more. Dubois, sensing a change in the room's energy, glanced down at his own control panel, a panel I knew he had programmed to receive alerts on any external interference. His eyes widened, not in anger but in pure, horrified comprehension. He looked up from his console, directly into the camera, directly at me, his facade of control finally shattering. You wouldn't dare expose the funding structure," he roared, abandoning the performance. "Too late, chef," I whispered, leaning into my own microphone. "You wanted a critic. You got one. I just reviewed your entire corporate structure, Antoine. 5 stars for the ambition, minus infinity for the accounting." As I spoke the last word, the sounds of sirens, real sirens, not synthesized threats, began to wail in the distance, me growing rapidly closer. Dubois looked from the screen, now flashing with federal alerts about the financial data, to the bound CEO, and finally back to the camera where I sat, the seemingly powerless critic who had just brought down his empire. He didn't reach for the cleaver again. He didn't fight. He simply slammed his fist onto the emergency disconnect switch on his console, plunging the entire penthouse into sudden, absolute blackness. When the SWAT team breached the suite minutes later, guided by Sarah's frantic directions, they found the studio dark, the CEO still tied up but unharmed, and the evidence of the financial crimes already copied and secured by federal agencies alerted by my emergency data dump. Chef Antoine Dubois, the man who bought a publishing company over a salty duck, was gone. Yes, he had vanished into the city's underbelly, leaving behind only the taste of sea salt, the memory of a perfect bottle of wine, and the chilling knowledge that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the cleaver, but the perfectly placed word, even if you are forced to write it yourself. I walked out of Zenith Tower into the early morning light, blinking against the sudden return of a world that obeyed laws other than a chef's ego. Sarah rushed up to me, shaking with relief. "Julian, what do we do now? Zenith is a wreck. Your job?" I looked back at the tower, then pulled out my phone. I opened a fresh, clean document on a private, encrypted server, not Zenith's. "My job just changed, Sarah," I said, taking a deep breath of the smoggy city air, finally tasting freedom again. "We're starting a new publication, independent, uncompromised, and I'm going to need you to start researching the deepest, darkest corners of the world's offshore banking systems, because Antoine Dubois is still out there, and I intend to review everything he ever eats for the rest of his life."